Symbolic interactionism is a methodology, but also a theoretical perspective. There are a few methodologies for which this is the case. Another is phenomenology. So, what is symbolic interactionism? It's the study of the meaning that people make of the world. The expectation is that the meaning that we make is the way in which we create and maintain social order. It's the attempt to understand human social action as something that is situated, interactive, and interpretive. We can look at the basic ideas by making reference to the three basic principles that Herbert Blumer outlined when he coined the term symbolic interactionism. So these are the three things that he saw that made symbolic interactionism a distinct perspective. First is that people act toward things based on the meaning of those things, and that the meanings arise in and through social interaction, and that conveying and changing meanings means that people must constantly be defining and interpreting the social situations they find themselves in. This is a little elaborated and more contemporary representation of the basic principles of symbolic interactionism, similar to what Blumer described, a little elaborated. One, human behavior is contingent on the object of orientation, what it symbolizes and what it means to us. And the meanings of objects and events are not intrinsic to those things themselves, but rather are constructed through interpretive processes. And that the meanings that we make are not static and are always subject to change. And that because people have the capability of being reflexive, that's the central mechanism through which interpretation, change, and new meanings occur. Symbolic interactionism is not singular in terms of the methods that it relies on. Oftentimes, however, participant observation, interviewing, life histories are common. The other element that characterizes symbolic interactionism as a methodology is oftentimes a prolonged engagement. In order to understand the meanings that people make of their world, their experiences, events, and objects, we must engage with them over an extended period of time so that we're confident we understand the meanings themselves, how they're made, and how they may change through interaction. So historically, the home of symbolic interactionism is American pragmatism. That is a philosophical perspective that suggests that when we know the world, that we can't separate this from a sense of human agency within the world. That's a very simplistic kind of definition of American pragmatism, but it is the core idea here. And we associate that with philosophers such as John Dewey and Charles Peirce. It was this American pragmatism that compelled people within the Chicago School of Sociology. We've already been introduced to Herbert Blumer, who coined the term symbolic interactionism, but also George Herbert Mead, and then a legion of students subsequently at the Chicago School of Sociology developed this methodological approach, and indeed this theoretical perspective. So when we look at the upper left-hand corner here, we see the names of people often associated with symbolic interactionism. So those we've mentioned, Mead and Blumer, but also Everett Hughes, Anselm Strauss, Howard Becker, and so on. One of the things that's interesting is that there are a number of other methodologies that are connected and related to symbolic interactionism. And that's the sense in which symbolic interactionism is often seen as a theoretical perspective, an umbrella under which there are a number of methodologies that share some ideas. First, this pragmatist historical foundation, but also an emphasis on inductive reasoning and a kind of profound empirical grounding, really looking at first order human experiences. So, other methodologies that are connected because of these foundational ideas are grounded theory, ethnomethodology, ethnography, autoethnography, and so on. On the bottom left, you see a list of kinds of things that have been studied using symbolic interactionism. Especially early studies looked at things like deviance or work and labor, and especially within particular occupational categories, but also social problems, socialization, self concept, and so on. There is postmodern turn in symbolic interactionism, oftentimes associated with people like Denzin and Ellis. And in this postmodern turn, society is, of course, seen as being quite fragmented, and one of the interests is in questioning and deconstructing meta theories. So it really, rather than looking at kind of big theories of social meaning, instead focuses at a more micro level, looking at immediate context and the details of everyday life. So there are a number of resources if you're interested in learning more about symbolic interactionism. Howard Becker, whose name was on one of the previous slides, is one of the key names in symbolic interactionism, and his website is a key source of information. I've also indicated here one of his early books, Outsiders, which was a study of deviance and gives a good sense of what early symbolic interactionism might have looked like. I've also given a book, Body and Soul, as an example that is a more contemporary example. In this case, this is a book that looks at what it means to be and how you make sense of being an amateur boxer. And then there are a couple of other links, a link to the SAGE publication resources on social interactionism, as well as the journal Symbolic Interaction. So lots of resources that you might use here to learn more about symbolic interactionism.